Hello, my name is Peter Parfitt. Welcome to the Éire Workshop. You remember recently I made a video about the length and fence stop for my tracksaw cutting station, which is just here out of view at the moment. So I've got hold of another one and I've set it up here, and I'm going to show you how I went about doing this. But first of all, let me explain that with the kit comes the actual movable stop. But because this is a mitre saw, I wasn't sure how I'd go about sorting out the cutting of pieces which are less than, in my case, 300 millimeters in this range of length. So that required something to be attached to this. So I've come up with my own solution to that. I've made a movable stop of my own, and I've got this little add-on piece which just goes straight on like that, held on by magnets, and that allows me to then cut things which are less than 300 millimeters in length. More of that later. Let me now show you how I went about this job. Now, this is the original arrangement. I've got the Éire flip stop fence here, which is absolutely super, and I've used it for years now. It's got this clever system of interlocking parts between the sliding element and the fence itself, which means this can only stop at whole millimetre intervals. You can't do 4.5, 5.5 or whatever. It's got to be either 4, 5, 6 or whatever millimetres. And which is a bit of a disadvantage sometimes. And the other disadvantage is that the scales are not stuck down. They do tend to move, and that of course leads to error. And so it's time to go, I'm afraid. The task now is to think about the 20 millimetre holes that need to be along here to take the posts that support this fence. And I've decided that this space here is too short, and I need to make a small extension going out here. It doesn't need to be very big, so that I can have a hole a bit further up here. So I've cut 4 pieces of stock. It's going to be roughly that sort of rectangular shape, but in order to do the jointing, I'm going to use the box making jig that I made a video about not so long ago. If you're not sure how to go about this, look at the video. I'll try and remember to put a link in the comments of this video linking to the box making jig. So I'm all set up. I'm going to do these short pieces first, and I like to use a clamp just to add a bit of accuracy to this as I go. And here we go. And having done those 2 ends like so, they're both identical. So that's that first one of these long sides done. Now, if we now take this original piece, you'll see that it fits in like so. We'll just continue to do the others in the same way. And there we have all of those pieces done. Now, before I start the gluing up, the piece that's going to be against the existing bench, I've put 3 holes in it, and I've remembered to allow for the thickness of the MDF, which is going to sink down into here. And that allows me to use 3 screws to fix this to the existing top. And equally important is to make sure you've got all of the marked edges in the same plane. And also, before gluing up, just give it a light sand to get rid of any little hairy bits that may have been left behind from the cutting process. And now gluing up is dead easy. All you need to do is make sure you get glue on every surface that's going to be in contact. Now, this isn't the best bit of box jointing I've done, but I'm really not worried. Because it's a tool after all. Right, the next stage is to create the channel which will take the piece of MDF. Now, I'm using a little rebate cutter with a ball bearing set up here. Now, this is not a trivial operation, and you must make sure that you go clockwise. So I'm going to go round like that, so that the cutting is always done on the left, like so, on the left like so, and so on. Now, in order to make this a little safer, I've put a pair of clamps on here. Everything's set up, so here I go. And there's the start of that cut. And I need to take it down further, and I'm going to do this in stages. And I've just cut this piece of MDF out, and I've used a washer just to shape where the corner's got to be cut. Well, that's close enough for government work. So I've finished my little extension piece, and I've stuck this piece on here because when I come to join it onto the end, it's going to be very difficult to get at the screw holes which are underneath here. And so I thought by having this little pair of wings here, I can screw through from the outside very easily. I've also taken a quick look over here where I would think that the holes should be, and I've marked on here where I want my first hole. And I'm going to drill this hole, and I'm going to drill it out to 20 millimeters right now, and you'll see why in a minute. Now I've now drilled that 3 millimeter hole where I want the 20 millimeter hole to go, and I'm now going to use my 20 millimeter drill guide from the path guide system in order to get that hole drilled out. Now, because I'm not worried if this hole is slightly to the left or to the right or whatever, I'm accepting the fact that there's only this one hole which is going to dictate where the guide should be placed. But I've got that nicely in there. I'm going to clamp this in place, which will help it to remain still whilst I do the drilling process. So I'm ready now to drill. So now I have my 20 millimeter hole. Now I'll show you why I've put that hole in at this stage. Now, first thing I've got to do is put a chamfer on this hole, and I'm going to put the retaining screw underneath. That's held in place now, and now I can just feed this onto the fence, like so. And I think you can probably see what I'm up to now. Doesn't matter where this goes exactly, as long as it's got enough of the fence against my straight edge. And I'm now going to just tighten that screw up there. So what we now have is the fence is now secured to the dog here, which in turn is secured to my little extension piece. What I now need to do is to get this absolutely tight against the straight edge. So now I'm going to hold that in place with a clamp. About the middle should do it, I think. And now I want to get this in the right place now. That's held there, that's where it should be. I just want to bring this extension piece up so it's flush at the top. So I'm now happy that my extension piece is absolutely against this face here, and it's also flush with this surface, which means I can put the two screws through those little wings that I put in. I'm sorry I can't get the camera into a position so you can see this, but in order to get at the screw which I've got here and the one on the other side, I've got this long extension piece on to my drill driver. I'm just going to check that everything is flush. Yep, that's flush. I can see that. That's fine. So I'm happy with that. So what we've now achieved is we've got this end of the proceedings in the right place, but we've got no additional holes down here to hold the fence in place. But I do know that that fence will be flush against this straight edge. Now, do you remember from my original video about the new fence? If you wanted to continue the line of the fence beyond where the fence could go, you could put these little discs into holes on your tracksaw cutting station, and this front edge would line up with the front edge of the fence. So what I've done is I've measured that. It's exactly 64 millimetres across, so therefore to the centre it's 32. I can now remove the fence like so, very carefully, and with the straight edge in place, I'm now going to put a scribed line here, which will be my reference point for measuring 32 millimetres to know where I've got to drill the next 3 millimetre hole. And I'm going to use my craft knife to do that, and I know that this hole's got to be up here somewhere. So I'm going to just... So I've now got that nice scribed line, which means I can move this straight edge out of the way. Now I'm quite pleased with the extension piece. It seems to have done a good job. I can see my scribed line there. Now what I've got to do now is very carefully from that scribed line is measure 32 millimetres absolutely as accurately as I can in order to know where the line of 3 millimetre holes needs to go. So I've got a nicely scribed line there. So with that ruler held in place, I've drilled the 3 millimetre hole there with using the drill guide, and I can now put a pin in there, and I've drilled those holes, and I've drilled a hole here even though it's in my piece of solid wood which goes all the way through, and I couldn't put a 20 millimetre hole there. I've drilled that with the 3 millimetre drill, and you'll see why very shortly. Well, I'm now able to position the drill guide. This is where the most important hole is. I'm not going to drill the others out. I could do that at a later stage if necessary. I can get the point of the drill down there, and you remember I said I needed to drill a hole into this solid piece of wood here. Well, the reason for that is quite simple, that pin needs to go down into there, and also this pin needs to go down into there in order to secure this drill block in place. So I can now connect my extractor and drill that hole out. And I can now put the chamfer on this hole, and now I can get this into position and secure it from underneath. And I'll just tighten up the screw at the back here for both of these. That's tight. So that fence is now fixed solid. I need to check that it's in a straight line. And that is absolutely spot on. Now there is a slight complication which I may have mentioned earlier, and that is that the fence here can only go so far because of course you've got the paraphernalia built into the saw itself. And this distance for me is just under 300 millimetres. So in a sense what I want to do when I have my stop mounted here, it needs to end at about 300 millimetres. If I put this piece of wood here, which is 300 millimetres long, that's where it comes to. So my 300 millimetre mark for the fence needs to be in line with that. Now, when I stick the tape on here, it doesn't need to be absolutely dead right because of course I can move this a little bit as long as I've left a bit of room between the end of this paraphernalia and where I start from. How do we then cut something which is 250 millimetres long? I'm making this special slider which will go along here, which will be used as my piece to push the wood against. And then I'm going to have this piece which I can fix on whenever I like, which will do the extra 300 millimetres. And then when I read the scale here, knowing that this is 300 millimetres long, to cut something which is 250, I put the scale marking here at 550. Could take away 300 from that, it's 250. At the moment I've made this longer than 300. And the reason for that is that once I've set up with my scale in place, this fixed, I can then set this on 300 and saw this through, knowing that that is exactly 300. Well, I need to show you how I went about making this. I've got some aluminium angle here, and I've cut holes in it which correspond then to where the centre of the channel is here. And what I did, I bought from eBay these Tnuts, and they're cheap as chips, I think. Reasonably cheap anyway. You just feed these into the slot like so. that will slide along. If you tighten those up, just finger tight. Seems to do a good job. Anyway, you'll notice in here I've got a hole there and a hole there, and they correspond to a hole here and a hole there. And I'm going to put magnets in there so that when I need to use this piece, all I do is put it in there like so. Magnets hold it in the right place, and away I go. Now, when you're dealing with these magnets, you've got to be very careful, because some of them are so strong that when they come together, if you get your skin trapped in there, it can actually hurt. And the important thing to do is to know which faces want to come together. And these are joined together, so I'm going to put a little green dot on here and here, which indicates that's the side that will have to go into the hole to be glued in. And as I'm doing two pairs, the other pair I put a red mark on. The reason is if I separate these and they were all red or all green, I might accidentally get them round the wrong way. So that's that side of it. The next thing to learn is how to get these apart. Now, I can't say I'm an expert at this, but the way I do it is put it on a surface like this where I can push down on one because they can slide apart reasonably easily, like so. So there are those two. And the other thing to remember is that the red ones go facing each other here and here, say, and the other colour goes here and here. So we make sure we don't get that bit wrong. And I'm using ordinary araldite to stick these in. And the other trick is to use a clamp to squeeze that in really tight in case there's some hydraulic locking behind that little gadget. So I'm just going to leave that. Because this is ordinary araldite, it's going to take forever to dry, but never mind. Now, the tape that I'm going to put on here is the left-handed tape. That's because this is where it fits as though I'm facing it, and the scale starts at low numbers here working upwards. So it's a left-handed tape, and this is a 3 metre long tape. I'm going to have mine starting at 30, and I've made a pencil line where I want the 30 to start. But I'm actually going to cut this at 29 and position the 29 just to the right. So there we go. Oh, by the way, I use snips. If you remember last time, I find that the better way to do it. And there's a sticky back to this. Just peel it away. Don't have to be ridiculously accurate with this, but it does pay to be as accurate as you can. Now, before I peel off all of the backing strip, I'm going to cut this at its far end. Put that to one side. It may be useful another day. And now I can continue taking this backing strip off the rest of the way. So that's a pretty easy process, and there's that sticky tape on. Now all I've got to do is take this back to the mitre saw and then do the adjustment to the extra bit over here, and we're done. Now I'm going to position this exactly on the 30 mark. And I'm going to bring down my saw, and I'm going to use my 30mm little gauge that I've made up, and I'm going to make sure this goes against the actual teeth of the saw because they stick out slightly from the body of the saw blade. So that's there, and I'm going to push this up against it. And now I can tighten up those little screws which screw through the posts at the back and hold this in place. And there's that one. So that's held in place. That's checked. Yep, that's exactly as it should be. Now if I do a cut now, that will be exactly 30. Now you remember this piece that I made up, it's not actually quite finished off yet, but I need to cut it to size. And it fits on like so. So it's held on with the magnets, it's there nice and securely, and so I can now cut this. What that means is if I loosen these off, they would only ordinarily be finger tight. So now if I move this to the left now, if I put it to the 450 point here, just tighten up these by hand, for sake of argument. Okay, that's on the 450 mark. Take away 300, and that then means that that cut would be exactly 150. I'm now going to do a test cut to see if it comes out as it should at 150. So I hope you can see this clearly. That says 149.97.03 out. Gosh, that's awful. Many thanks for watching. Take care. Bye-bye.